Here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of the Cult. And of course, we're going to be talking about Billy Duffy. And the Cult were formed in Bradford, England in 1983. And Billy is a really interesting guitarist, and he's influenced by classic rock groups, Queen and Led Zeppelin and AC/DC, and some bands like that. Some Thin Lizzy, kind of in there too. But then he's also influenced by punk and the Stooges and the Sex Pistols and the New York Dolls and groups like that. Really interesting guitarist, and the Cult, themselves are a really interesting band. Kind of a blur between the Doors and Zeppelin and the Cure and Uriah Heep, and there's a lot of influences all kind of packed together in their sound. And I know Billy definitely uses a Les Paul, but it's also kind of unusual to notice that he's used a Gretsch White Falcon for years, and plays it with distortion and this attitude. And it's, really cool to see a guitarist like that, where it's like, okay, he's got his own style and his own approach and his own sound. And this is going to be a pretty fun lesson for you to work through. And before we get started here, I do want to take a second and just mention a Cult album that maybe you're not familiar with. And I have had a lot of feedback and comments from people thanking me for recommending albums and kind of uncovering lesser known guitarists or bands and music that they can listen to. And the big one here, obviously you definitely want to check out, Sonic Temple and Love and Electric. Those are great, albums from the Cult. But in 2001, they released an album called Beyond Good and Evil. And I bought it the day it came out. I think I was standing like at Best Buy, and it was in their new release rack, and I thought, yeah. And when I bought it and put it in, I was blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, the Cult have beefed up, their sound. Billy started using drop D tuning, and he kind of rearranged his style, for that album. And it's literally, in my opinion, one of the best hard rock albums of the 21st century. It's still, in my opinion, there's not very many albums that have topped that one, in my personal opinion. It's just hard hitting, it's melodic, parts of it are dark, parts of it are it's all over the place. And if you haven't heard that album, after this lesson, hop over and check it out, because there's a lot of great songs, tons of cool ideas. And when I bought that and listened to it, it just rekindled, my love and respect for the band. And then of course I dove in and went back and listened to, the classics too. And, as my public service here, I guess, for music and musicians and bands, definitely check out Beyond Good and Evil. It's a great one. All right, with the opening, that was She Sells Sanctuary, which is from the Love album. And I've always loved this song. It's a classic song. And Billy's using open string drones, for that intro part. He's got a bunch of, swirly chorus and delay and reverb. I think that's chorus. It might be like kind of a slight phase or something. But drones are really common. This has been around and been used everywhere, and whenever I hear this kind of, playing, the first thing I think of usually is Stranglehold, good old Ted Nugent. Or maybe some AC/DC. Kind of example would be Shine, Collective Soul, of course. But with the Cult, with what Billy's doing in She Sells Sanctuary, he's basically outlining D Mixolydian as far as the notes that he's selecting along the G, and then he's playing that open D string, ringing against it. And to give you a little more of a clue or an idea of how to do that, First, you need to map out Mixolydian. So that's just basically a major scale with a flat 7. So in the key of D, we're going to walk up the scale, and instead of playing C sharp, you want to play C natural right there, like this. Now we're going to map that out on the G string. And obviously we can start with the open G. Since we have access to that, as an open string. And then you want to play the open D against it. And just let that string, ring against those fretted notes. And kind of just play around with that idea. You can also do it with other string groups, but for this example, it's just on the D and the G. But one more time here with this. And there you can see he's starting way up on that A, in the beginning, and then by the end, he ends up an octave lower on a lower A, which that's cool. That slide in there too. It's kind of slippery. And then the second time, and right there at the end, he basically reaches all the way over the 15th fret on the B string to grab that D note to kind of finish it. So it's giving it this really high note at the end. And then you'll hear the the snare hit, and then it starts rocking. And you'll hear him kind of play that almost like a power chord, but he's using those really cool open string drones. For another variation or version of these open string drones, check out the song Breathe, which is from Beyond Good and Evil. And you'll see he's doing kind of a variation of the same type of thing, like this. He's targeting, D Mixolydian, and Billy's definitely a big fan of Mixolydian, but so are people like Jeff Beck and Slash, and there's a ton of guitarists that use, Mixolydian in their solos and their riffs and, licks and stuff like that. And that's a very simple example, but that's really all that song needed for the intro. And if you've heard it before, after that part, it just starts rocking out, with these drop D riffs, but that's a really effective kind of basic, intro or, opening for a song. And it's also mimicking, the vocal melody, which that's another thing that's really useful about these drone strings and open string drones, is you can kind of craftily, mimic melodies and these other, areas of songs in a different way, instead of just playing a single note, or instead of trying to come up with some kind of clunky, chord pattern. Sometimes those transparent drones, really sound cool. And you can hear them, like I, mentioned some groups earlier, but bands like Tool, and there's a whole bunch of bands that have ideas like this. Right up next we have the very popular Fire Woman, which is from Sonic Temple, and once upon a time, MTV and Headbangers Ball, they played this all the time. It seemed like, daily they would play this video, 15 or 20 times a day. And I would always sit and watch it and just sit there and think, this song just completely rocks. And it reminds me of AC/DC a little bit. It's got these ringing power chords and that kind of, heavy guitar, kind of edge. And something like this. It's very basic as far as the intro part, and I've mentioned this on a few episodes of Chordplay and some other lessons on this channel. But guitar parts don't have to be hard to play for them to be good, and that's a very basic, kind of simple guitar part, but it's so effective and it just catches your attention, and it's, the intro and just kind of leading you into the song. And I see so many guitarists, especially, these days on social media and YouTube, and they're just all over the place, furious flurry of all these notes. And that's impressive, but it's not very musical. It's just technique. It's like, a flamethrower, and it's like, okay, that's awesome, but let me hear you play a song. Can you play something with a melody or a groove, or, can you move me beyond just impressing me with technical skill? And that's a great example of just a basic guitar part that's in your face. It's kind of warming up your ears for this song that's getting ready to play. And then when the song really kicks in and the drums and the lead and the, power chord riffs start, it's almost like it's kind of whetting your appetite for the main course. But we've got a partial G right here. It's going to function as a C sus2, that C note with the open D and open G, and then a D power chord. And then you're going to play a C sus4 right there with the 3rd fret on the A and the D and the open G. Partial E minor with the 2nd fret on the D, open G, open B. And then play that open, D5 open position chord there. Repeat that again. And then end with a G5 power chord, kind of a Malcolm Young approved, open position G5. And then repeat that whole section. The next example is from Love Removal Machine, which is from Electric, and this is using sus4 chords. And typically, most guitarists think of Eddie Van Halen when they think of sus4, and there's other players out there too, but Eddie, definitely used sus4 and sus2 chords all over, Van Halen, and we've talked about Van Halen, in a couple Chordplay episodes. But this one, I took all the delay and swirly effects off, and it's more just kind of straight ahead. And it still reminds me of AC/DC, even though we're kind of tapping into some Van Halen territory with the sus4, but something like this. And there you can see it's a D major technically, and then D sus4, and he's kind of playing with that rhythmically. And then it moves down to a C major, and then C sus4 to once again, that open position, G. I just think AC/DC, and you're in the right neighborhood there. Next to the song War the Process, which is the opening track from Beyond Good and Evil, and this song's in drop D tuning. And Billy, for the first time in his career on Beyond Good and Evil, he kind of tapped into using drop D, but he did some really interesting things with it. It wasn't just, one finger power chords and simple things. It's like he kind of used it and kind of rebuilt or restructured, his playing style. And the part itself looks like this. Really cool. And that's basically, in this tuning, that would be a D add 11, or a D minor add 11, sorry. And then in this tuning, that would basically be an F6 sus2. And then this is really just G5, G power chord with open strings. You just loop, those 3 chords, and you've got the intro. The last example here is the song Painted on My Heart, which this comes from the Gone in 60 Seconds soundtrack. And I'm pretty sure it's on a compilation or like a greatest hits. I don't really have any other compilations of greatest hits. I just have albums from the Cult. And I don't have the Gone in 60 Seconds soundtrack, but I know it's featured in that film and in that soundtrack. But I don't know if you can find it anywhere else. It might just be an exclusive, for that soundtrack. I'm not really sure. But this is really cool. It has this almost Beatlesque kind of feel with the chords, this descending, kind of mutating chord part. And he's also using a bunch of tremolo and like a rotary, effect. And I'll demonstrate that in a second, but I didn't, kick that effect on just so you can really hear these chords. Something like this. Really cool, and it reminds me of the Beatles big time. Just that dreamy kind of atmospheric sound and ringing chords, and then just changing notes ever so slightly. And it starts with this B minor, of course, and then get rid of the root and then play that open A string, and it's B minor over A. And then this is really crafty. He's going to move over, and he's basically grabbing the B minor, but then there's a G sharp right there on the bottom. So you have to kind of plan for that change, and you might have seen my little kind of finger twister right there when I was remembering how to put that together. But when you're stepping down the chords, you're going to have to change your fingering a little bit to grab that, B minor over G sharp. So that's a good little, kind of workout for your fingers, just trying to, figure out where am I playing that. But you should play it something like that. And that's really just like a partial G major chord, and then it does kind of signal G major 7 there at the very end. Grabbing that F sharp right there, and he's also grabbing B flat technically right there. So it's it's unusual to hear that tonality. He's playing the major 7th and the minor 3rd, kind of a minor major 7, flirting with that sound. Think of James Bond, the minor major 7 chord, but we're doing it there in G. With that rotary effect added, that'll sound something like this. Underwater kind of effect, but it's cool. All right, that's going to wrap this episode with the Chords of the Cult, and definitely it should be obvious once again, I'm a pretty big fan. I own several of their albums. I've never seen the Cult in concert. I really would like to catch them live at some point, hopefully, in the future. But there's just something about their music. Ian's vocals kind of has that Jim Morrison kind of vibe to it, where he has a very powerhouse, vocal style, and then Billy's guitar has this kind of classic rock and punk edge, and I think the two of them worked it, really well together. And when you hear them, on the radio or, put an album on or whatever, it's just like, yeah, I like this. And it has that certain something, that AC/DC has had forever. And it's just that primal kind of grit and that drive that you hear in a lot of great, rock and hard rock music. So, check them out if you're not really familiar with them, and if you are already a fan, go ahead and dive right back into their music, because it's really refreshing and good to kind of go back and just listen to their stuff. And they definitely evolved. You can hear the Cult on every album, but then each album is a little bit different. They kind of leaned a little bit more one way or the other, depending on what year it was and what they were doing. But anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.